Bibek Debroy panel which suggested doing away with rail budget and clubbing it with the general budget. So going forward, from this year onwards, it seems that the rail budget is going and it will be just part of the general budget. We have with us Mr. Bibek Debroy to talk about it. So your panel suggested do away with it, and at that time everybody thought that it is just impossible to do it. Now this is happening. So how will it all go about?
Well, the railway budget, or ending the railway budget as we have known it, is partly a symbol. It is a very visible symbol. But fundamentally, when we talked in the report about the structural reforms, there were 5 pillars to those structural reforms. The first was decentralization of decision making. The second one was a transition to commercial accounting. The third was an independent regulator. The fourth was an unification of entry into the railways across the cadres, which would eventually result in a change in the nature of the railway board. And the fifth was private entry. So all of those structural reforms imply that the railway budget as we have known it need not exist. Any organization will have a budget, the railways will continue to have a budget. All that ends is that the process of presenting a railway budget in Parliament, which is not required either constitutionally or legally, will end.
So in effect, in terms of accounting also and in terms of social responsibility of budget also, there would be a problem because then the general budget will have to take the social responsibility part, which is subsidizing fares also, etc., etc. So will that be easy to do, or it will have greater problems?
There are some issues that need to be sorted out, which is perfectly understandable because the system, after all, has been going on since the year for about 92 years, effectively since 1925, from the time of the Act Committee. So the way I see it, the issues that need to be sorted out are firstly what you do about the dividends. For those who do not know, dividends are not really dividends in the way we understand the word dividends today. It is really a repayment of interest on the loan that the Government of India extends to the railways in perpetuity. The principal is never extinguished. What is paid, repaid is the interest, and that's what the dividends is. So one, dividends. 2, what do you do about the capital that has been invested, so to speak, by the Government of India in terms of that loan in perpetuity? 3, as you mentioned, what do you do about the social costs? Today the social cost that the railways, the figure that comes from the railways is about 25 to 26,000 crores a year. But all of that is not proper social cost. Some of it is because the railways have not changed their fares. So obviously one needs to figure out a system where the railway should be legitimately compensated for their social costs, because although the railways should be persuaded to move to become more commercial, there will always be social objectives. And the last bit that needs to be sorted out is what happens to the IRFC window, which is the window that the railways uses to borrow.
So going forward, when general budget has this rail budget and rail budget presentation and everything, speech, etc. goes, then will it impact? So you said that railway will also have to restructure their fares, etc. So doing these two things simultaneously will be a difficult task. Do you think this thing happening from this budget onwards?
No. I think there's a committee which is going into all this. We have to await the recommendations of what that committee eventually says. But under the assumption that there is no rail budget from 17 to 18, the railways is already proposing the setting up of a regulator, although they call it a development authority. So that development authority will make recommendations on the fares. Presumably those recommendations will not be mandatory, will be indicated, but doesn't matter. I think the essential issue with fares is something that we have known all along, which is passenger fares are too low and freight rates are too high. So there's a little bit of rationalization that is bound to happen. It's also the case that the railways have not exploited the possibilities of using non-fare sources of revenue. There is plenty of scope for that. So far as passenger fares are concerned, I am leaving out suburban, which is a different category. But so far as other passenger fares is concerned, I think the broad issue is passengers will be willing to pay, provided the services improve. And one of the reasons for the resistance is the perception that the services are not improving across all the trades.
So now coming back to another issue, which will be happening this year is that of change in financial year and also budget getting preponed, coming to January, etc. How will this impact generally, the government finances or the general presentation of budget, etc.?
You see, I do not think the change in the financial year will happen from 1780. It will probably happen somewhere down the line, but after all, there's a committee set up under the chairmanship of Shankaracharya. It's supposed to submit a report by December. So this is something in the future. I don't think this is going to happen from 1780. The main three reasons are, one is many of the project proposals, many of the projects involve public expenditure, they involve construction. And in a country without agroclimatic zones, during the monsoon, you cannot do any sensible construction activity. So this is reason number one. Reason number two, all said and done, the Kharif crop is still very important. Regardless of the share of agriculture in national income, agriculture remains important even for companies which are, let's say, into FMCG products. And you have no sense of what is happening to the Kharif crop until the actual cropping season, not so much the monsoon. This is the second reason. The third reason is a very minor one, which is aligning it with international practice. But as I said, I don't think this is going to happen from 1780. What's probably going to happen from 1780 is something that we already talked about, the end of the railway budget as we have known it, and secondly, an end of the planned versus non-planned distinction.
Thank you, sir.